The portrait on the founder's wall. It was a winter morning when Marina first stepped into the grand lobby of the Bellevue Hotel, one of the city's most imposing buildings. Its polished bronze doors reflected the weak sunlight that insisted on breaking through thick clouds. She had been hired as assistant manager just the week before, and her heart still raced with that mixture of pride and nervousness that accompanies new beginnings. The hotel was a century-old institution, a place where generations of families had celebrated weddings, where politicians had sealed deals in private salons, where artists had found inspiration gazing from windows onto meticulously tended gardens. The walls told stories in every detail, crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen constellations, Italian marble that covered the floor in hypnotic patterns, staircases that curved with mathematical elegance. Marina came from humble origins. Her father had worked as a janitor his entire life, his hands always rough from honest but thankless labor. Her mother had sewn clothes at home to supplement the family income. They had saved every penny so she could study hotel management, believing that education was the bridge connecting dreams to reality. "You'll go far, my daughter," her mother used to say, running her calloused fingers through Marina's hair. "You have something special inside you." But the world does not easily forgive those born without the privileges of wealth. Marina had learned this early, in the small daily humiliations, in the looks that measured her by the simple clothes she wore, in the doors that closed before she could even knock. She had developed an invisible armor, a protective shell made of ambition and determination. And without realizing it, she had also absorbed something more dangerous, the belief that a person's worth could be measured by the appearance of success they projected. That first morning, Marina was reviewing reservation records when an elderly man entered the lobby. He must have been in his mid-70s, with disheveled white hair that urgently needed a cut. His coat was of faded tweed, with visible patches on the elbows. His trousers were creased in a way that suggested they had been stored carelessly. His shoes, though clean, were so worn that the sole separated slightly from the leather at the front. The man walked to the reception desk with slow steps, dragging his left foot slightly. There was a quiet dignity in his posture, despite his unkempt appearance. His eyes were a faded blue, like the sky on an undefined day, but there was in them a depth that suggested oceans of experience. "Good morning," he said with a hoarse but gentle voice. "I would like to have coffee in the restaurant, if possible." Marina looked at him over the counter and felt a stab of irritation. The Bellevue's restaurant was known for its exclusivity. It wasn't the kind of place that people, like that man, usually frequented. She imagined the other guests, with their impeccable suits and discreet but expensive jewelry, looking with disapproval at that displaced figure. "Sir," she said, with a tone that tried to be professional but carried a subtle coldness, "our restaurant has a dress code. Perhaps you would prefer the cafe on the corner. It's much more accessible." The man blinked, as if he had received a gentle slap to the face. "I understand," he said softly. "Thank you for your time." He turned to leave, and Marina saw how his shoulders curved slightly, as if an invisible weight had been placed upon them. For an instant, something inside her twisted, a small voice that whispered that perhaps she had made a mistake. But she silenced it quickly, returning her attention to the computer screen. "That's the kind of person we can't let wander freely here," she commented to Laura, the senior receptionist, a middle-aged woman who had worked at the hotel for 15 years. "It gives a bad impression." Laura frowned, but said nothing. There was something in her expression that Marina couldn't decipher, a mixture of surprise and disappointment. The week followed its normal course. Marina plunged into work, with the intensity of someone who needs to prove their worth at every moment. She reorganized systems, optimized schedules, implemented new protocols. Her boss, Mr. Dumont, an elegant Frenchman with an accent still strong after decades in the country, observed her progress with reserved approval. "You have talent, Marina," he said during a review, "but remember, This hotel is not just about efficiency, it's about people. Each guest carries a story. Marina nodded, but deep down, she believed she understood the business better than these old philosophies. The modern world demanded results, not sentimentalism. It was the following Friday when everything changed. Mr. Dumont summoned the entire staff for a special meeting in the main hall. It was unusual. Meetings usually happened in smaller, more practical rooms, but when Marina entered, she understood that this was different. The hall was prepared with formal elegance. Chairs arranged in a semicircle, a small podium at the front, and something covered with a red velvet cloth beside it. The lights were adjusted to create an atmosphere of importance, almost reverential. "Thank you all for coming," began Mr. Dumont, his voice echoing softly on the high walls. "Today is a significant day in our hotel's history. As you know, the Bellevue was founded in 1923 by three visionaries who believed that true hospitality transcends commercial transactions. They wanted to create a place where each person, regardless of who they were, would feel seen, valued, respected. Marina listened with polite attention, but her mind was already beginning to wander. She had reports to review, suppliers to contact. "One of those founders," continued Mr. Dumont, "was a man named Thomas Laurent Beaumont. He came from a wealthy family, but chose a different path. He dedicated his fortune and his life to creating not just a business, but a legacy of humanity." Mr. Dumont paused, his eyes traveling across the staff's faces. "Thomas Beaumont passed away 5 years ago, but his spirit still guides every decision we make here, and today, finally, we can reveal something that has been in restoration for the past 3 years." He walked to the covered object, and with a ceremonious movement pulled the red cloth. What was revealed was an oil portrait, masterfully painted, of impressive dimensions. The canvas captured a man in his younger years, perhaps 40, dressed with timeless elegance. But it wasn't the clothing that caught attention, it was the face. The blue eyes that seemed to look directly into the soul of whoever observed. The expression that mixed wisdom, kindness, and a quiet melancholy, as if the man knew all the secrets of human suffering and still chose to believe in goodness. Marina felt her heart stop. She knew that face. It was the elderly man she had dismissed the previous week. Even through the decades separating the portrait from reality, even through the marks that time had sculpted on his skin, the eyes were unmistakable. Those same faded blue eyes that had looked at her with gentle sadness when she sent him away. "This is Thomas Laurent Beaumont," announced Mr. Dumont with reverence. "The man whose vision created all of this. The man who, even in the most difficult days of the Great Depression, kept this hotel's doors open, not just for the wealthy, but for anyone who needed a place to feel human. He personally served coffee to the homeless on winter mornings. He believed that the true measure of an establishment was not in how it treated its most important clients, but in how it treated those who most needed dignity." The words fell on Marina like stones. Each syllable was a weight on her chest, compressing her lungs, making it difficult to breathe. "Thomas is still alive," continued Mr. Dumont, and Marina felt her legs weaken. "He's 83 now. He sold his shares decades ago, distributed his fortune to charitable causes. He lives in a small apartment not far from here, with a modest pension. But he occasionally visits this place, just to see if the spirit he planted still grows." Marina had to lean on the chair beside her. The room began to spin gently. "He came here last week," said Mr. Dumont, and his voice now had a note of sadness. "For the first time in months. He was excited to have coffee, to feel again the atmosphere of this place that was his materialized dream." The silence in the room was absolute. Marina could hear blood pulsing in her ears. "He was sent away." The words hung in the air like an accusation. "Someone on our staff judged that he wasn't suitable to be here. Someone looked at this extraordinary man and saw only poverty." Marina felt tears begin to burn her eyes. She wanted to run, disappear, undo time, but her feet were glued to the floor. I don't say this to shame anyone," continued Mr. Dumont, his voice softening. "I say it because it's a lesson we all need to remember. In this hotel, in this life, we never know who stands before us. We never know what stories each person carries. And if we judge by the surface, we lose the opportunity to touch something sacred." After the meeting, Marina went directly to the bathroom and vomited. Not from physical illness, but from a moral nausea so deep that her body didn't know how to process it any other way. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, the red eyes, the pale skin, and didn't recognize the person looking back. Who had she become? She spent that night awake, obsessively replaying every detail of that morning. The way she had looked at Thomas Beaumont, the tone of voice she had used, the expression on his face when she sent him to look for a more accessible cafe. Each memory was a sharp blade cutting her conscience. But worse than the shame was the growing understanding that this had not been an isolated moment. How many times had she judged people by appearance? How many times had she made assumptions based on clothes, accents, zip codes? How many times had she reduced complex human beings to simple categories of suitable or unsuitable? She thought of her father, with his rough hands and his janitor's uniform. She thought of how he always came home tired but dignified, how he never bowed before anyone, even when others treated him as invisible. She thought of how many times someone had probably looked at him the same way she had looked at Thomas Beaumont. The pain was unbearable. On Saturday morning, Marina picked up her phone with trembling hands. She knew she needed to do something, but didn't know exactly what. Laura, the senior receptionist, answered on the second ring. "Laura," Marina said, her voice breaking, I need to find Mr. Beaumont. I need to apologize." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, gently, "I imagined you would call. Come to the hotel. I have his address." An hour later, Marina was sitting in a small cafe near the hotel, waiting. Laura had called Thomas Beaumont and explained the situation. To Marina's surprise, he had agreed to meet her. When he entered, Marina felt her heart tighten. He wore the same patched coat, the same creased trousers. But now, knowing who he was, she saw something completely different. She saw dignity that didn't depend on expensive clothes. She saw wealth that lived in the eyes, not in the wallet. "Mr. Beaumont," she began, standing so quickly she almost knocked over the chair. I have no words to express." He raised a hand gently. "Sit, please." They sat, and Marina forced herself to look directly into those blue eyes she now recognized from the portrait. "I made a terrible mistake," she said, the words coming in a torrent. "I judged you by appearance. I was cruel and superficial, and I have no excuse. I grew up poor, you need to understand. My father was a janitor, my mother a seamstress, and I think I developed this need to prove I'm no longer that girl. And in the process, I became exactly the kind of person who used to make me feel small." The tears flowed freely now, and she didn't try to hide them. "I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry. Not for your money or your position or anything like that. I'm sorry for being disrespectful to another human being. You deserved kindness, and I offered judgment." Thomas Beaumont remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. It wasn't a smile of triumph or superiority. It was something deeper, a smile of understanding, from someone who had already seen all kinds of human failures and learned to forgive them. "Marina," he said, his voice hoarse but warm, "do you know why I dress like this?" She shook her head, confused. "Because these are my favorite clothes. This coat," he touched the faded tweed with affection, "was a gift from my late wife. She bought it in a small shop in Paris in 1968, when we were on our honeymoon. I wear it because each patch is a memory. Each worn thread is a story." Marina felt her throat tighten. "I could buy 100 new coats," he continued, "but none of them would carry the weight of 50 years of love. None of them would have the faint scent of lavender that still lingers because it was her favorite perfume." He paused, looking out the window at people passing on the street. When you sent me away that day, I wasn't offended because you didn't know who I was. I was sad because you didn't care to know. To you, I was just a category, poor old man, not a person, not a lifetime of experiences and loves and losses." Marina closed her eyes, letting the words penetrate. "But I accept your apology," said Thomas, and now there was a tenderness in his voice. "Because you're here, because you felt the discomfort of your own action and didn't run from it. That requires courage, and courage is the first step to wisdom." They talked for more than 2 hours in that cafe. Thomas told stories of when he founded the hotel, of the challenges he faced, of the lessons he learned. He told of how he himself had been arrogant in his youth, how life had taught him through losses and failures. "When I lost my wife," he said, his voice choked, "I also lost my identity. I had built everything around her, and suddenly I was alone with all the money in the world, but no purpose. That's when I understood I had confused success with meaning." He looked at Marina with those eyes that had seen so much. "That's why I distributed my fortune, not out of noble altruism, but out of desperation. I needed to feel that my life had meaning beyond numbers in a bank account, and I discovered something surprising. The less I had, the richer I felt, because I began to measure my life in moments, not in coins." Marina listened to each word as if they were drops of water in a desert. She realized she was in the presence of something rare, someone who had truly traversed the journey from success to meaning. When they finally said goodbye, Thomas held Marina's hand for a moment. "Don't be so hard on yourself," he said. "We all stumble. What matters is whether we get up and learn. You have a good heart, Marina. Don't let the world harden it completely." In the following weeks, something in Marina began to change. It wasn't a dramatic and instantaneous transformation. That kind of change exists only in fairy tales. It was something more subtle, more profound, like a plant that slowly reorients its leaves toward the light. She began to observe people differently. The cleaning man who worked the night shift, she learned his name was Roberto, that he had 3 children, that he was studying law in a night course, dreaming of a better future. The lady who came every Tuesday to have tea in the lobby, she discovered her name was Donna Amelia, that she had been a ballerina in her youth, that she came to the hotel because it was where she had married 60 years ago and could still feel her late husband's presence in the walls. Each person stopped being a category and became a universe. Marina also began spending her weekends differently. She volunteered at a homeless shelter, serving coffee and talking, just talking, listening to stories she never would have heard if she had continued in her narrow bubble of ambition. She met João, a former engineer who had lost everything in a bitter divorce and subsequent depression. She met Clara, a woman who had fled an abusive relationship with only the clothes on her back. She met Marcos, a war veteran who never managed to readapt to civilian life. Each story was a window into the fragility of the human condition, into how easily any of us could fall. "I used to think poverty was a moral failure," she confessed one evening to Thomas, who had become something like a mentor. They met regularly now, usually in the same cafe, sometimes just walking through the hotel gardens. "I thought that if people just worked hard enough, like my parents, they would get out of that situation. But now I see the world is more complicated than that. I see how luck, circumstances, illness, loss, how all of that can dismantle a life in instants." Thomas nodded. True empathy only comes when we recognize that we're not fundamentally different from others. When we understand that, if not for grace and luck, we could be exactly where they are. Marina thought a lot about her mother lately. She had passed away 3 years before, from a cancer discovered too late. In her final days, her mother had held Marina's hand and whispered, "Don't forget who you are, my daughter. Don't let success make you forget where you came from." At the time, Marina had understood that as encouragement to remember her roots. But now, she comprehended it was something deeper. It was a warning, a request, that she keep her humanity intact, even while climbing in life. One day, Marina was reviewing job applications for a new receptionist position. One of the candidates caught her attention, not for impressive qualifications, but for the lack of them. The young man, named Pedro, had only completed high school. His experience was limited, temporary jobs, nothing in the hospitality sector. His cover letter was sincere, but grammatically imperfect. The Marina of 3 months ago would have discarded that application without thinking twice. But now she saw something more. She saw the courage of someone trying to change their life. She saw potential hidden behind the limitations of opportunity. She called the listed number. A young and nervous voice answered, "Pedro, this is Marina Santos from the Bellevue Hotel. I would like to invite you for an interview." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long she thought the call had dropped. "Are you serious?" he finally asked, his voice trembling. "Completely. Can you come tomorrow at 2? "Yes, yes, of course, thank you so much." The gratitude in his voice was so pure that Marina felt a lump in her throat. At the interview, Pedro appeared in a suit that clearly wasn't his. Too big in the shoulders, the sleeves slightly too long. But he had made the effort. His shoes were shiny, his hair carefully combed. Marina conducted the interview differently than she would have in the past. Instead of focusing only on experience and technical skills, she asked questions about values, about how he dealt with difficult situations, about what it meant to him to work in a place like the Bellevue. "I know I don't have the experience other candidates must have," Pedro said honestly. "But I promise I'll work harder than anyone else, and I learn fast. I just need a chance." Marina looked at that young man and saw herself years ago. She saw the hunger, the determination, the fear that the door would close before he could cross through it. "Pedro," she said, "I want to offer you the position, but with one condition." His eyes widened. "Anything. The condition is that you promise yourself that no matter how successful you become, you'll always remember what it's like to be on the other side of this table. That you'll always treat people with dignity, regardless of how they dress or how much money they have. Can you promise that?" Pedro nodded vigorously, tears beginning to form in his eyes. "I promise, I swear." Marina extended her hand. "Then welcome to the team." As months passed, Marina watched Pedro flourish. He absorbed every lesson, worked every shift with unwavering dedication. But more importantly, he treated every guest, rich or poor, important or common, with the same genuine respect. One day, Marina saw him talking at length with an elderly lady who was obviously confused, possibly with early dementia. Other staff members had tried to hurry her along, but Pedro sat patiently, helping her remember which room was hers, offering her tea, ensuring she felt safe. "Why did you do that?" Marina asked afterward. "You had other tasks waiting." Pedro smiled. "My grandmother had Alzheimer's. I know how scary it is when the world doesn't make sense anymore. If someone had had patience with her, I would have been eternally grateful." Marina felt pride swell in her chest. She had given Pedro an opportunity, but he was giving the hotel something much more valuable, a genuine heart. Marina's transformation didn't go unnoticed. Mr. Dumont called her into his office one day, 6 months after the incident with Thomas Beaumont. "Marina," he began, leaning back in his chair, "I've noticed changes in you, and not just me, the entire staff has noticed. You were always efficient, always competent, but now you're something more. You care, truly care." Marina didn't know what to say. "Thomas told me about your meetings," continued Dumont, "about your conversations. He told me you're one of the bravest people he's met because you were able to face your own failures and choose to grow from them." He leaned forward. "I'm retiring next year, and I'm recommending you to be the next general manager of the Bellevue." Marina felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. "But I only have 2 years of experience here." "You have something more valuable than experience," said Dumont. "You have wisdom. You understand the true purpose of this place, and that can't be taught. It can only be lived." That night, Marina visited her mother's grave for the first time in months. She knelt on the grass and placed fresh flowers in the vase. "Mom," she whispered, "I almost lost myself. I almost forgot everything you and Dad taught me. But I found my way back. I promise I'll honor you. I promise I'll use whatever success I have to remind people that kindness matters more than status." The wind blew gently, swaying the trees around the cemetery, and Marina felt, perhaps it was imagination, perhaps it was something more, a sense of peace, as if her mother had heard. In the following months, preparing to assume the general management, Marina implemented several changes at the hotel. She created a scholarship program for employees who wanted to continue their studies. She established partnerships with organizations that helped people in transition, ex-prisoners trying to reintegrate, refugees looking for work, youth aging out of foster care. "Not all will work out," Thomas said when she presented her plans. "Some people will disappoint you." "Though, I know," Marina responded. "But if I can change one person's life, even 1 in 10, it's worth it." And she was right. Not all cases were successes. There was a young man who stole from the hotel and disappeared. There was a woman who couldn't handle the stress and simply stopped showing up. But there were also victories that shone like stars. There was Maria, a refugee from Venezuela, who started in the laundry and 3 years later became head housekeeper, managing an entire team. There was Carlos, an ex-prisoner who had served time for robbery committed in his desperate youth, who became one of the best assistant chefs in the restaurant. There was Anna, who had grown up in foster homes and never had a family, who found at the Bellevue not just a job, but a community that celebrated her when she finally graduated from college. Each story was a reminder that people were rarely defined by their worst moments or their most difficult circumstances. Each person carried within them the possibility of transformation if someone just gave them the chance and support. In her first year as general manager, Marina instituted a tradition. Once a month, the hotel opened its doors on Sunday morning to serve a free breakfast for homeless people from the neighborhood. It wasn't condescending charity. It was genuine hospitality. Guests were treated with the same attention and respect as any paying guest. They ate on fine china, were served by smiling staff, were called Sir and Ma'am. Thomas Beaumont, now 84, appeared at each of these Sundays. He sat with the guests, conversed, listened to stories. Sometimes Marina watched him and saw tears in his eyes, tears of joy at seeing his original vision still alive, still growing. "You've done this better than I ever did," he told Marina on one of these Sundays, watching the room full of people laughing, talking, simply being human together. "I learned from the best teacher," she responded, gently touching his arm. 2 years after the incident that changed her life, Marina was giving a talk at a hospitality conference. The auditorium was full of eager young professionals, all dressed in their best suits, all with hungry eyes for success. She looked at that sea of faces and saw her younger self multiplied hundreds of times. "I want to tell a story," she began, "about the day I learned the most important lesson of my career. It wasn't at a seminar, it wasn't in a book. It was when I made a terrible mistake and had to face who I had become." She told the complete story, the shame, the pain, the transformation. She didn't spare herself, didn't soften her failures. She was brutally honest about her judgment, her arrogance, her blindness. The hospitality industry teaches us about efficiency, about profit margins, about customer satisfaction measured in stars and reviews, she said. And all of that is important. But if we lose sight of the fundamental purpose, that we're in the business of making people feel seen, valued, human, then everything else is empty. She paused, letting the words settle. Each person who crosses our doors is fighting battles we don't know. Each person carries invisible wounds, secret hopes, deep fears, and we have the power, in each interaction, to make these people feel a little more worthy of love and respect, or to make them feel less than nothing. A young man in the back raised his hand. But what if we can't afford to be kind to everyone? What if our job is to protect the image and standard of our establishments? Marina smiled sadly. It was the same question she would have asked 2 years ago. "I'll answer with another question," she said. "What kind of standard are we protecting if it excludes basic humanity? What kind of image are we projecting if it says a person's worth is in their appearance or their bank account?" She walked across the stage, making eye contact with different people in the audience. True luxury, the true standard of excellence, isn't in crystal chandeliers or Egyptian cotton sheets. It's in how we make each person feel. And when we understand that, when we truly internalize that, we discover that kindness and excellence aren't contradictory. They're inseparable. After the talk, dozens of people approached her. Some shared their own stories of judging and being judged. Others thanked her for validating feelings they had suppressed in the name of professionalism. A young woman, with eyes bright with tears, hugged Marina and whispered, "Thank you for reminding me why I entered this field." That night, lying in her bed, Marina thought about how strange life was, how a single moment of cruelty could transform into a journey of redemption, how the worst version of herself had been necessary for her to find the best. She thought of Thomas Beaumont, who could have held a grudge but chose to offer wisdom. She thought of Laura, who could have reported her but chose to help her fix her mistake. She thought of Pedro, whose gratitude reminded her daily that opportunity is a sacred gift. She thought of her mother, whose voice still echoed in her moments of doubt, guiding her back to the path. Thomas Beaumont passed away the following spring. He died peacefully, in his sleep, in the small apartment that had been his home for so many years. When Marina learned of it, she felt a deep pain, but also enormous gratitude. He had given her the most precious gift, the chance to become who she should be. The funeral was simple, as he had requested. But hundreds of people appeared, former hotel employees, people he had quietly helped over the years, strangers whose lives he had touched with small acts of kindness. Marina gave the eulogy. She spoke of the man who had built an empire, but measured his wealth in smiles, not dollars. The man who had taught her and so many others that true legacy isn't in what we accumulate, but in what we give. "Thomas told me once," she shared, her voice breaking, "that the measure of a life well lived isn't how much success we achieve, but how many doors we open for others to pass through." He opened doors his entire life, and now it's our responsibility to keep those doors open. In Thomas's will, there was a clause that surprised everyone. He had created a significant fund specifically for the scholarship program Marina had initiated at the hotel. But there was a condition. Every beneficiary must promise to pass forward the support in some way when they were in a position to do so. "Kindness is not a transaction," said the letter attached to the will. "It's an unbreakable chain that connects the past to the future. Each act of compassion echoes through time, creating waves that touch shores we'll never see." Marina framed these words and hung them in her office, where she could see them every day. Years passed. The Bellevue Hotel continued to thrive, not despite its commitment to humanity, but because of it. It became known not just for its elegance, but for its heart. Articles were written about the hotel that remembers hospitality means honoring humanity. Pedro, the young man Marina had given a chance, eventually became assistant manager, and when it was his turn to hire, he followed the example that had been given to him, looking not just for qualifications, but for potential and character. Maria, the Venezuelan refugee, opened her own small inn years later, using the principles she learned at the Bellevue. She specialized in hosting other refugees, offering not just accommodation, but a safe space to rebuild shattered lives. Carlos, the ex-prisoner, became executive chef and started a program to teach cooking to at-risk youth, offering them an alternative to life on the streets. Each person touched by kindness passed forward the gift. And so the chain continued, link after link, life after life. Marina, now with hair beginning to grey, sometimes stopped in the hotel lobby late at night, when it was empty and quiet. She looked at Thomas Beaumont's portrait on the founder's wall and felt a silent conversation happen. "I'm trying," she whispered to the painting. "I'm trying to honor what you started." And in her imagination, or perhaps in something deeper, she heard his response, carried on that gentle wind that sometimes blew through the revolving doors. "You're not just honoring, my dear. You're creating. You're writing the next chapters of a story that never ends." One night, long after business hours, Marina was closing her office when she noticed a figure in the lobby. It was a young man, perhaps 25, wearing worn clothes and carrying an old backpack. He was looking around with an expression of mixed admiration and displacement. Marina could have called security. She could have assumed he was there for questionable reasons. But something in his posture, the way he looked at the crystal chandelier with childlike eyes, the gentle way he touched the marble, made her pause. She descended the stairs and walked to him. "Can I help you?" she asked, gently. The young man startled, clearly expecting to be expelled. Sorry, I shouldn't be here. I've passed by this hotel my whole life, always wanted to see the interior. It's so beautiful." Marina looked at him and saw so many things: vulnerability, hope, the fear of being judged. She saw all the people she had been and could have been. "What's your name?" she asked. "Daniel," he responded, hesitant. "Daniel, would you like a cup of coffee? The restaurant is closed, but I can make something in the kitchen." His eyes widened. "Really? But I can't pay." "Consider it a gift from the house," she said, smiling. "Come." They sat at a table in the empty restaurant, and Marina served coffee and some croissants left over from the day. Daniel ate with silent gratitude, and gradually his story emerged. He had grown up in foster homes, never knew his parents, struggled in school, not from lack of intelligence, but because it was difficult to focus on lessons when you didn't know where you'd sleep the following week. At 18, he aged out of the system and had been trying to survive since then. "But I have a plan," he said, with a determination that shone through fatigue. "I'm saving for a technical course. I want to work in hospitality. I know it sounds silly, considering everything, but I always thought that if I could work in a place that makes people happy, it would make my life have meaning." Marina felt her heart tighten and expand at the same time. "It doesn't sound silly," she said softly. "It sounds perfect." She took a business card from her pocket and slid it across the table. "Daniel, come see me Monday morning, at 9. I'd like to talk to you about a position that might be opening here." Daniel looked at the card, then at Marina, then back at the card. Are you serious?" "Completely serious. But Daniel," she leaned forward, echoing the words she had said to Pedro years before, "if I give you this opportunity, you have to promise me something. Promise that, no matter where your life takes you, you'll always remember this feeling. You'll always treat people with dignity, especially those who need it most." Tears began to run down Daniel's face. "I promise. I swear by everything sacred, I promise." Marina extended her hand. "Then I'll see you Monday." Later that night, driving home, Marina looked at the starry sky through her car's sunroof. She thought about how life was an infinite tapestry of connections, how each choice we make sends ripples through time, how a moment of cruelty had almost defined her life, but a moment of grace had redeemed her. She thought of Thomas Beaumont, now resting somewhere beyond the stars, and whispered, "The chain continues. I'll make sure the chain always continues." And in the silence of the car, in the quietness of the night, she felt, perhaps real, perhaps imaginary, a response carried on the wind. "I know, my dear. I always knew." Dib. The years continued their inexorable march. Marina aged but did not harden. If anything, she became softer, more compassionate, more aware of the fragility of human existence. She had learned that true strength wasn't in building walls, but in opening doors. That real power wasn't in exclusion, but in embrace. Daniel, the young man she had met that night, became one of the hotel's finest employees. He worked with a dedication born not from obligation, but from gratitude. And when guests asked him why he seemed so genuinely happy in his work, he would smile and say, "Because someone once saw me when I was invisible." And that changed everything. On Marina's 60th birthday, the hotel staff organized a surprise celebration. The ballroom was filled with people whose lives she had touched, employees she had mentored, individuals she had given second chances, families whose stories had intersected with hers in meaningful ways. As she stood before them, overwhelmed with emotion, Marina realized that Thomas Beaumont's portrait on the founder's wall was no longer just a painting of one man. It had become a symbol of something larger, a reminder that every person we meet carries infinite worth, infinite possibility, infinite stories waiting to be honored. "I learned something important," she said to the gathered crowd, her voice strong despite the tears. "I learned that we're all just walking each other home. That kindness isn't weakness. It's the strongest force in the universe, that every time we choose to see the humanity in another person, we're building something that outlasts us all." She looked around the room, at the faces of people from every background, every walk of life, united in this moment of connection. Thomas Beaumont taught me that a legacy isn't measured in buildings or bank accounts. It's measured in how many hearts we've opened, how many lives we've touched with simple, radical kindness. And if I've learned anything, it's that we all have that power, every single day, in every single interaction. The room erupted in applause, but Marina wasn't finished. "So I want to challenge each of you," she continued. "Look for the Thomas Beaumonts in your life, the people others overlook, dismiss, judge by appearances. See them, really see them. Because in doing so, you might just save two lives, theirs and your own." As the celebration continued around her, Marina stepped outside into the hotel's garden. The stars above seemed brighter than usual, as if the universe itself was bearing witness to this moment. She thought of that winter morning so many years ago, when she had sent an elderly man away from the very building where she now stood. She thought of how that moment of cruelty had broken her open, revealing both her worst self and her potential for something better. "Thank you," she whispered to the stars, to Thomas, to whatever force had given her the chance to transform. "Thank you for not letting me stay the person I was becoming." Inside, the party continued. Laughter echoed through the halls. People who had once been strangers had become family. And somewhere in the midst of it all, the portrait of Thomas Laurent Beaumont seemed to smile a little wider, as if approving of what his legacy had become. Because in the end, that's what mattered. Not the money, not the success, not the accolades. What mattered was this, that kindness had been passed forward, that doors had been opened, that human beings had remembered how to see each other's sacred worth. The chain continued unbroken, stretching forward into a future that would be written by all the lives touched in this place, in this moment, in this beautiful, fragile, magnificent experiment of choosing love over judgment. And Marina knew, with absolute certainty, that this was just the beginning.